Archival incident, a case with no screaming throughout the years. Clergy have occasionally documented situations that did not follow the patterns they were accustomed to seeing. Many spiritual investigations involve fear, panic, or emotional outbursts. But sometimes, the most unusual cases are the quiet ones. The following report describes one such incident. The church first became aware of the case after a parish priest was contacted by a family requesting spiritual guidance for their adult daughter. The young woman had recently begun behaving in ways that worried those around her. At first, the changes seemed small. She slept less than usual. She spent long periods sitting alone in silence, and she often appeared distant during conversations. Her family initially believed she was dealing with stress or emotional exhaustion. But one detail made the situation unusual. Despite the changes in her behavior, she never appeared frightened. In many situations where people report unusual experiences, fear is the first sign. But in this case, there was none. The woman remained calm, almost unusually calm. When the parish priest first visited the home, he expected to find someone distressed or overwhelmed. Instead, the woman greeted him politely and invited him inside. They sat in the living room and spoke for nearly half an hour. Her voice was steady. Her answers were clear. Nothing about her behavior suggested panic or confusion. The priest eventually asked why her family had asked him to visit. The woman answered simply, "They think something is wrong." The priest asked if she believed that was true. She thought for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "I don't feel alone anymore." The statement caught the priest's attention. He asked what she meant. The woman looked toward the hallway for a moment before answering, "There's someone else here sometimes." The priest asked if she had seen anyone. She shook her head. "No, but I know when they're nearby." The priest continued asking careful questions. Did she hear voices? Did anything move in the house? Did the presence frighten her? Her answer remained the same each time. No. In fact, she seemed strangely peaceful while describing it. Over the next several days, the priest returned to the house several times. Each visit followed a similar pattern. The woman spoke calmly. Her behavior remained steady. She described the presence in the same way every time. Always nearby, always silent, but never threatening. What made the case unusual was the absence of the things clergy often expect in difficult situations. There was no screaming, no violent reactions, no emotional outbursts, only quiet certainty. Eventually, the priest asked if the family would allow a short prayer to be said in the house. They agreed. The priest stood in the center of the living room and began quietly. The room remained completely still. No sound, no movement. The woman sat calmly in a nearby chair. Halfway through the prayer, she suddenly looked toward the hallway again. The priest noticed the movement and paused briefly. "What is it?" he asked. The woman answered softly, "They're leaving." The priest continued the prayer. When it ended, the woman looked around the room slowly. Then she said something that surprised everyone present. "It's quiet again." Over the next several weeks, the priest continued checking on the family. The woman never again reported sensing the presence. Her sleep returned to normal. Her behavior returned to normal. The strange calmness that had surrounded the situation faded as well. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Many cases involving unusual experiences include fear or agitation. This incident was notable because neither occurred. The calm nature of the subject and the absence of distress were carefully recorded. The report was later archived." The final note recorded in the document reads, "Not every case reveals its nature through noise or fear. Some are marked only by silence." Investigation record. The silent possession over the years. Clergy have investigated many situations where individuals displayed unusual behavior that could not be easily explained. In most reported possession cases, the signs are dramatic raised voices, violent reactions, or sudden emotional outbursts. But occasionally, investigators encounter something far more unsettling. A case where none of those signs appear at all. The following report describes one such investigation. The church first became aware of the situation after a small parish received a request from a family concerned about their younger brother. The man was in his early 20s and had recently begun behaving in ways that were difficult to understand. At first, the change seemed minor. He became quiet, very quiet. The man had once been outgoing and talkative with his family, but over the course of several weeks, he gradually stopped speaking altogether. He still moved normally. He still ate meals with his family. He still went about his daily routine, but he rarely said a word. At first, his family believed he might be struggling with emotional stress. Doctors examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His hearing was normal. His voice worked when doctors asked him to speak, but once he returned home, the silence returned. The man seemed present, yet distant. He often sat in the same chair for long periods of time without moving. Sometimes he stared quietly at the floor. Other times he looked toward empty parts of the room as if focusing on something no one else could see. His family became increasingly concerned. But one detail made the situation especially unusual. The man never appeared frightened. There were no sudden reactions, no shouting, no visible distress, just silence. Eventually, the family contacted their parish priest. The priest agreed to visit their home and speak with the young man. When he arrived, the man greeted him with a small nod but said nothing. The priest sat across from him and began asking gentle questions. At first, there was no response. The man simply looked toward the floor. The priest continued speaking calmly for several minutes. Then finally, the young man spoke. His voice was quiet, but clear. "They're listening." The priest paused. "Who is listening?" he asked. The man slowly lifted his eyes. Then he looked toward the corner of the room. "They don't like when I talk," he said. The priest wrote the statement down. Over the next several days, the priest returned several times to observe the situation. Each visit followed a similar pattern. The man remained mostly silent, but occasionally he would say short sentences that raised more questions than answers. Once he said, "They prefer it when the room is quiet." Another time he whispered, "They don't want anyone else to hear." The priest noticed something else as well. Whenever prayer was spoken aloud, the young man's posture changed slightly, not violently, just a subtle tension in his shoulders. But he never shouted. He never resisted. He remained completely silent. Eventually, the priest consulted with other clergy and arranged a private spiritual evaluation. The meeting took place in a small chapel connected to the parish. Only a few clergy members were present. The priest began the session with a calm prayer. The young man sat quietly in a chair near the front of the chapel. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the young man slowly lifted his head. His eyes moved toward the doorway behind the priest's. "They're leaving," he said quietly. No one else saw anything, but the room felt suddenly lighter. The priest continued the prayer until it was finished. When the session ended, the young man looked around the chapel with a confused expression. "What happened?" he asked. The silence that had surrounded him for weeks seemed to disappear. Over the following days, the young man began speaking normally again. His family reported that his behavior returned to what it had been before the strange quietness began. He no longer mentioned anyone listening. He no longer sat silently for long periods of time. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Most possession cases are marked by loud resistance or emotional disturbance. This case was unusual because the subject displayed none of those signs. The silence itself became the most notable feature." The report was later archived. The final line recorded in the document reads, "Not all disturbances reveal themselves through noise. Some are recognized only through what is absent." Archive entry: "The calm spirit throughout the years Clergy have occasionally recorded encounters that did not follow the patterns they expected to see. Many spiritual disturbances are described as frightening or chaotic, but some reports describe something very different, an encounter that appeared calm. The following account comes from one such archived report. The church first became aware of the situation after a parish priest was contacted by a woman who lived alone in a small home outside the town. At first, her request seemed unusual, but not alarming. She did not report fear. She did not report strange noises or violent disturbances. Instead, she described something that sounded almost peaceful. She said she believed the spirit was present in her home. What made the case unusual was the way she described it. "It doesn't scare me," she told the priest. "In fact, it feels calm." The priest listened carefully as she explained what had been happening. The experiences began several weeks earlier. At night, while sitting in her living room reading, she sometimes felt a quiet presence in the room. Not a sound, not a shadow, just the feeling that someone else was nearby. At first, she assumed it was simply imagination, but the sensation returned again and again. Sometimes she felt it when walking through the hallway, other times while sitting in the kitchen. The feeling was always the same. Someone was there, but the presence never felt threatening. In fact, she described it as strangely peaceful. The priest asked if anything in the house moved or made noise. The woman said no. Nothing had ever been disturbed. No objects moved. No footsteps were heard. Just the quiet feeling of another presence. Because the situation seemed unusual, the priest agreed to visit the home. When he arrived, the house appeared completely ordinary. The woman greeted him politely and showed him the rooms where she had felt the presence most strongly: the living room, the hallway, and a small bedroom near the back of the house. The priest walked through the house carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. The rooms were quiet. The windows were closed. The building felt peaceful. They sat in the living room for nearly an hour speaking about the situation. Then suddenly, the woman paused mid-sentence. Her eyes moved slowly toward the hallway. "It's here again," she whispered. The priest looked toward the hallway. He saw nothing. The space was empty. Still, the woman remained calm, not frightened, just aware. The priest asked her what she felt. "It's standing there," she said softly. The priest continued observing the situation carefully. He eventually asked if she would allow him to say a short prayer in the home. She agreed. The priest stood quietly in the center of the living room and began the prayer. The house remained silent. No sound, no movement. But halfway through the prayer, the woman looked toward the hallway again. Then she said something unexpected. "It's leaving." The priest continued the prayer until it was finished. Afterward, the woman looked around the house carefully. The calm feeling she had described for weeks seemed to be gone. Over the following months, the priest stayed in contact with the woman to ensure the experiences did not return. They never did. The house remained quiet. No further sensations of a presence were reported. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Encounters involving unseen presences are often associated with fear or agitation. This case was unusual because the subject described the experience as peaceful rather than threatening." The report was later archived. The final line recorded in the document reads, "Not every unexplained presence produces fear. Some leave only a quiet impression." Investigation note: the patient who never reacted over the years. Clergy have occasionally been asked to assist in situations where a person's behavior raised questions that doctors or family members could not easily explain. Many of these cases involve strong emotional reactions: fear, anger, or sudden distress. But sometimes investigators encounter the opposite, a case where there is no reaction at all. The following account comes from one such documented report. The church first became aware of the patient after a hospital contacted a parish priest, who occasionally visited patients requesting spiritual support. The patient was a man in his late 30s who had been admitted after experiencing extreme fatigue and unusual behavior at work. Doctors believed stress might be responsible, but after several days of observation, the medical staff noticed something unusual. The man rarely reacted to anything. At first, this did not seem alarming. Some patients simply remained quiet while recovering, but over time, the lack of reaction became impossible to ignore. Nurses spoke to him. He answered politely, but his expression never changed. He showed no emotion, no surprise, no discomfort. Even when loud noises occurred nearby, he barely looked up. Doctors performed several tests to rule out neurological problems. Everything appeared normal. The patient could hear clearly. He could see normally. His reflexes worked exactly as expected. Yet he remained strangely calm in every situation. One afternoon, a nurse accidentally dropped a metal tray in the room. The crash echoed loudly against the hospital walls. Most patients would have jumped at the sudden noise. But the man did not move at all. He simply looked at the nurse and asked if she needed help picking up the tray. The staff began to wonder if something else might be affecting his behavior. Eventually, one of the nurses suggested contacting the local parish priest who sometimes visited the hospital. The priest agreed to meet the patient. When he arrived, the patient greeted him calmly and invited him to sit beside the bed. The conversation began normally. The priest asked about the man's health. The patient answered politely. Then the priest asked a simple question. "Have you been feeling anything unusual lately?" The patient thought for a moment. Then he answered quietly, "I feel watched sometimes." The priest asked if the feeling frightened him. The man shook his head. No. The priest asked if he heard voices. The answer was no. He asked if the man had seen anything unusual. Again, the answer was no. The priest continued asking careful questions, but the patient remained calm and unbothered by everything discussed. Over the next several days, the priest returned several times to observe. Each visit revealed the same thing. No reaction. Even during prayer, when many people show emotional responses, the patient remained completely still, not tense, not uncomfortable, simply neutral. Eventually, the priest asked if he could say a short prayer beside the patient's bed. The man agreed. The priest began quietly. The hospital room remained silent. Halfway through the prayer, something changed. The patient slowly turned his head toward the doorway. Then he said something unexpected. "They're leaving." The priest paused briefly. "Who is leaving?" he asked. The patient looked confused. "I don't know," he said, "but the room feels empty now." The priest finished the prayer. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, the patient's expression changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. He seemed relieved. Over the next several days, the hospital staff noticed something different as well. The patient began reacting normally again. He laughed during conversations. He looked surprised when unexpected noises occurred. His behavior returned to what doctors considered typical emotional response. Eventually, he was discharged from the hospital and returned home. No further incidents were reported. In his final report, the priest wrote, "The absence of reaction in a situation where reaction would normally be expected was the most unusual feature of this case." The report was later archived. The final note recorded in the document reads, "Not every unexplained event reveals itself through visible disturbance. Some are recognized through what is missing." Archived account, the quiet presence. Throughout the years, clergy have occasionally recorded encounters that did not involve noise, fear, or visible disturbance. Most reports of unusual experiences describe loud events, voices, movements, or sudden reactions. But sometimes the most puzzling cases are the ones that remain completely quiet. The following account comes from one such archived report. The church first became aware of the situation after a middle-aged man contacted his parish priest with a concern that had been troubling him for several weeks. At first, the experience seemed almost too small to mention. The man did not hear voices. He did not see shadows. Nothing in his home moved or changed. Instead, he described something much simpler. He felt a presence. The feeling began one evening while he was sitting in his living room reading. The house was quiet. The television was off. Suddenly, he became aware of the strange feeling that someone else was in the room. He looked up from his book and scanned the room carefully. No one was there. He assumed it was simply imagination. People sometimes feel watched when they are alone. So he returned to reading. But the sensation did not go away. In fact, it became stronger. It felt as if someone was standing somewhere nearby, watching silently. Eventually, the man stood up and checked every room in the house. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. Everything appeared normal. Over the next several days, the feeling returned again and again, sometimes in the living room, sometimes while walking down the hallway, once even while he was standing in the kitchen. Each time the sensation was exactly the same. Someone was there, but nothing could be seen or heard. At first, the man ignored the feeling, but after several weeks, the experiences became too frequent to dismiss. That was when he decided to contact his parish priest. The priest agreed to visit the home. When he arrived, the man described the situation carefully. The priest listened and asked several questions. Did the presence speak? No. Did anything move in the house? No. Did the sensation feel threatening? The man shook his head. No, he said. It's just there. The priest walked slowly through the house, observing the rooms where the feeling had occurred most often. Everything appeared normal. The house was quiet and well maintained. They eventually sat together in the living room. For nearly an hour, they spoke calmly. Nothing unusual happened. Then suddenly, the man stopped talking. His eyes moved slowly toward the hallway. It's here again, he said quietly. The priest looked toward the hallway. The space was empty. Still, the man remained certain. The priest asked him to describe exactly what he felt. It's standing there, the man said softly. But it isn't doing anything. The priest remained calm. After several moments, he suggested saying a short prayer in the home. The man agreed. The priest stood in the center of the room and began quietly. The house remained silent as the prayer continued. Nothing moved. No sound could be heard. But halfway through the prayer, the man slowly turned toward the hallway again. Then he said something unexpected. It's leaving. The priest finished the prayer. Afterward, the man looked around the house carefully. The strange sensation that had followed him for weeks had disappeared. Over the next several months, the priest remained in contact with the man. The feeling never returned. The house remained quiet and normal. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Reports of unseen presence without sound, movement, or visual confirmation are difficult to evaluate. However, the sudden disappearance of the sensation following prayer was carefully recorded. The report was later archived. The final line recorded in the document reads, 'Some experiences leave no trace except the memory of their presence.